and for future generations who dream of building a future on their own terms.
Thanks, Cecile, for sharing that message and all for all the work that you do. Becky, we're going to come back to you right now, and we left off in Minnesota.
Yes. So I had to drive to Minnesota to get my abortion because I wasn't 18 yet and would have needed my parents' consent if I had had the abortion in Wisconsin. My boyfriend drove me with reluctance, but also with the awareness that it was my decision to make. When I got to Minnesota, I had to meet with a judge for what's called a judicial bypass. Because I wasn't 18 at the time, Minnesota laws require that I speak to a judge who would then decide if I was mature enough to make the decision on my own. It was a long day going through paperwork and the legal process, being escorted from place to place. It felt incredibly secretive, and it really felt like the world was working against me that day. After my abortion, I found it hard to live with the choice. Not because I was morally opposed to abortion. I knew it was the right choice for me, but because it was something I felt I had to hide from everyone. My parents' church told me it was wrong because my circle of friends felt uncomfortable around me when they found out. I felt sad and isolated. Living with the stigma was really hard. I know I was lucky that I had the access I did to comprehensive reproductive health care. I was lucky I had a car to get me from Wisconsin to Minnesota. I was lucky I had a savings account to pay for it. I don't know how many times I had to lie to my parents about where I was going. The fact that they didn't somehow find out and interfere with my choice, it felt like luck. The choice shouldn't rely on luck. It's terrifying to me that people are working so hard right now to limit or end people's access to abortion. I want to share my story because I want people to hear that I stand by my choice. I want the stigma to end. We need to remove barriers, not build them up. I want our culture to have respect for women and the choices they're going to make about their lives. To the Supreme Court, the hoops we're already jumping through as people with reproductive systems are incredibly challenging. The regulations that are being imposed in Texas are shutting down clinics and creating more barriers. These laws are unnecessary and a direct burden to the rights of women and people with reproductive systems. We need to be moving towards positive change, and we need to stop hiding the clinics that provide abortions.
In that story, and we'll be sure to get that message to Justice Thomas for you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Brianna, who's next?
And now we'll be joined on Skype by Angelica Perez, who manages the Empower line at Whole Women's Health, the clinic at the center of the upcoming Supreme Court case. Welcome, Angelica. I'm sorry, we have Elizabeth on the line.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, sorry for some confusion. Angelica sounds amazing, but no, my name is Elizabeth Griswold, and I am excited to be part of the conversation and excited about the relays that our bodies and politics and religion all intersect. I'm actually a Christian minister, and so that's part of my story as well. So just to share my own story, I was working as a volunteer in Guatemala when I was about 26, 27. I was down there for a year and a half, and began dating a local Guatemalan man. And along the way, we discovered how many differences we had. There was a large power differential between us related to education, experiences out in the world. We had very different values on many issues, but there was also a really nice connection. At one point, we talked about, in a theoretical sense, what we thought about abortion. And I've always been pro-choice, and he was very much not. And he said, if in the context of our relationship you ever did get pregnant and you wanted to have an abortion, I would never want to know. So when that happened, that's exactly what happened. I was living in a convent of Catholic nuns at the time, so was very much hiding this pregnancy and knew that I needed to go home. It was one more level that revealed how much privilege I had as a white person, as a person with some degree of education and money and a U.S. passport, and I could leave. And so I did, and I came home, and I chose a medicine abortion, which felt empowering to me to be able to be in control of that situation. And it was still very difficult, well, painful. Uh, and also, I would say it took a long time for me to get over thinking I was perfect, to acknowledge I'd made a mistake in not having been careful enough. I gave myself a hard time for getting pregnant, not as much for choosing abortion. That was probably one of the most mature things I've ever done, and to make that choice for me and for my future. In a very direct way, it actually allowed me, believe it or not, to become a minister because a few months after this happened, I ended up going to seminary. I was able to continue my plans to go because I didn't have a baby. And so I got a master's of divinity degree, and I got very involved while in seminary with Seminarians for Choice, which is part of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. Met a lot of wonderful other women who'd gone through similar experiences. And then when I was ordained, I'm ordained in the United Church of Christ, which is a wonderful supporter of women's rights. And I've made that part of the work I do now. Reproductive rights is something that I preach on and that I like to speak out for, in terms of activism, and it influences the way I'm raising my daughter. I have an almost 3-year-old, and she knows correct terms for her body parts and knows her body belongs to her. And it's like I said, it's a part of my daily life and my life of faith, and how much I believe each of us, men and women, and everybody in between, is endowed with rights over their own body, and that God wants us to know life in the fullest. And it's not about punishment; it's about love and going forward and choosing what makes the most sense for us to have full and abundant lives. So I'm really glad to share my own story, and proud of so many other women who are doing the same today.
Today, Elizabeth. If you could address the Supreme Court as they consider this case, what would you say to them specifically?
Would say that the law seems clear. Since Roe v. Wade was decided, it has become an issue that women have the right to privacy and the right to make decisions for their own bodies. And in terms of shutting down clinics and what's going on in Texas, when women don't have access to clinics, it's the same as not having the right. So I ask that they really understand women are people too, and decide in favor of that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I have a little girl at home too who knows all her parts, so I'm with you on that. Thanks for spending time with us. And now we are joined on Skype by Angelica Perez, who manages the Empower Line at Whole Women's Health, the clinic at the center of the upcoming Supreme Court case. Welcome, Angelica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Empower Line is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Empower Line is the national resource line for whole women's health, and we assist people with accessing abortion care. So we're helping people navigate abortion laws, health insurance, abortion funding, and scheduling in 5 different states, including our clinics in Texas.
Amazing. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the common barriers that patients face when trying to access abortion care in Texas specifically?
Absolutely. And so I would actually just like to share with you a story from one of our patients we saw who actually traveled from my hometown of Amarillo, Texas. So I'm just going to go ahead and read that. Her story, unfortunately, really illustrates all that's going on right now. So when I found out I was pregnant, after much consideration, I decided abortion was the best option for me and my family. Before I found Whole Women's Health, I went online and I searched abortion in Amarillo. From here, I called a few different numbers who told me they couldn't help me with abortion and that it's a sin, but they could help me with diapers and other things for the baby. Thankfully, I found the number to Whole Women's Health. When I asked if they do abortions, they immediately told me yes, and I knew right away that I was going to be okay. When speaking with the person over the phone, they told me that I could be seen in 1 day rather than 2 days, since the closest clinic to me is in Fort Worth. which, by the way, is a 6-hour drive one way for me. It was a small relief to know that I wouldn't have to be there that extra day and postpone this further. They also told me that by law, I had to speak with a doctor over the phone, and all I remember from this call is that the doctor told me abortion causes breast cancer, even though he said no medical research supports this. On top of that, I was very worried about costs because I received Medicaid, and I was told that Medicaid in Texas doesn't cover abortion. And so thankfully, I was able to get financial help, and I was very grateful for that. When I was all said and done after that phone call, I still had to make arrangements to take a couple of days off from work. I still had to make sure that I had somebody to watch my kids and figure out how I was going to pay the rest of the remaining balance, and how to get gas for my car so that I could travel all the way down there. And then once it came to the appointment day, before I entered the clinic, there were people outside shouting things, carrying things that weren't very nice. And so I was really happy when I got inside, and it was nice, and it was purple, and it was so calm in there. And thankfully, the staff and the care at Whole Women's Health was excellent, and I'm so happy that I was able to get that taken care of. And so I'm writing you because, I'm really grateful for the work that you did, but I also want to know how I can help, because I know that I'm very lucky in that I was able to come see you, and I worry about the women that don't.
It's incredibly powerful. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, and for being with us, and for all of the important work that you're doing in Texas.
Thank you so much for having me.
Miriam, who's next?
I'm happy to be able to share a pre-recorded message from Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan. After speaking to women who had abortions and hearing their stories, Congressman Ryan changed his position on abortion and has become a supporter of abortion access. Here's his video.
Hi, I'm Congressman Tim Ryan, and I represent Youngstown and Akron, Ohio. I'm proud to stand with the 1 in 3 campaign and the Advocates for Youth, and would like to thank them for including me in this year's Speak Out. But most importantly, I would like to thank all of the individuals who shared their stories. Your refusal to be silenced will begin to break down the stigma and the shame that all too often surrounds abortion. I was elected to political office at a very young age, and being raised in a Catholic household, always considered myself pro-life. But over the past 14 years in political office, I have gained a deeper understanding of the complexities and emotions that accompany the difficult decisions that women and families make when confronted with these situations. I have sat with women from Ohio and across the nation and heard them talk about their varying experiences, abusive relationships, financial hardships, health scares, rape, and incest. Today, I'm a 41-year-old father and husband whose feelings on this issue have changed. I've come a long way since being a 26-year-old state senator, and I'm not afraid to say that my position has evolved. No federal or state law banning abortion can honestly and fairly take into account the various circumstances that make each decision unique. I have come to believe that we must trust women and families, not politicians, to make the best decisions for their lives.
Thank you for that message, Congressman Ryan. Right now, I am thrilled to welcome Martha Plimpton, an amazing actress and staunch advocate for abortion rights. Martha,
15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
We're good. How are you?
I'm really great.
It's great. We can hear you and everything's working. So Martha, can you start by telling us your story?
Well, I've got a few of them. But I will say that I'll start when I was 19, and I was working in Seattle, and I was acting and pursuing my career as an actress, and my boyfriend and I at the time got pregnant, and we both knew that there was no way either of us wanted to be parents or could be parents at that point in our lives. And so we made the decision mutually and, with relative ease to go to Planned Parenthood and get an abortion. And it was a very easy decision. It was the right thing for me to do. And, we went as a couple, and it was, you know, uh, an amazing option that I had, a choice that I had in a major city that, provided that kind of care at a time when I really needed it. And so I was very grateful for that. And I went on to, pursue my dreams and continue working. And, that's that. And I've always felt very grateful to not only the doctors at Planned Parenthood, but to my family for their support. I was very lucky to have that. A lot of people don't have that. And I was, in a position that I could move on and feel supported, which was really great. I think that, it gave me a very keen appreciation for people who are not in as privileged a circumstance as I have been in. And it made me aware that the ease with which I was able to access this care and make the decision that was right for me is something that should be afforded every single woman on the planet. It doesn't seem right to me that I should have that choice and others shouldn't, either depending on their zip code or their economics or the country where they live, any of those things. So that's sort of the beginning of my story. And I have others like we all do. Life is a rich and complex tapestry of surprises and things that come up out of nowhere and give you pause and make you assess where you are in your life, and the ability to have agency over your own destiny and what you want to do with yourself, the kind of human you want to be in the world, what you want to contribute to the world. That should be in every individual's hands, and I see women as being individuals. So there you go.
Right on, I do too. And thank you so much for sharing one of your stories. And particular, thank you for being, someone who has a big platform and willing to share that with with us, and also to share your story about abortion in particular. We've been asking all our other guests and speakers to share a message to the Supreme Court directly, since this is the People's Brief. What do you want to say to the Supreme Court? Maybe Justice Scalia?
Really great expression. I feel like talking to Justice Scalia is like trying to speak Spanish to goldfish. I mean, unless the goldfish is living in Spain. I don't know. Maybe goldfish do speak Spanish. But it's difficult to know where to begin with Justice Scalia. I would say that he's got some very keen, clear ideas about individual rights and individual responsibility. And it seems to me that the ability to make a decision about whether or not to have children is an essential aspect of that. Forced births doesn't seem to me to be the way we want to go, constitutionally speaking. I can't imagine that would jibe well with with the court if it really was paying attention to truly being as conservative as Mr. Scalia seems to be. But my overall message to the Supreme Court, of course, is that I support them in their very, their dedication to the rule of law, obviously. And I certainly agree with their decision striking down Defense of Marriage Act. And I think that these rights, these civil rights, go hand in hand. And, to take away a woman's right to choose, or to make it so difficult that you've essentially taken away the right, to make it so onerous and so impossible to access that right, essentially removes the right. And I think that should be pretty clear. And obviously there are, there are lawyers who can make this argument much more cogently than I can. And so I leave it to them and the experts at Center for Reproductive Rights and all these other people who have been writing briefs and all of this. But yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, I hate to go on and on. I'm pretty sure I'd get interrupted by now if I was standing there.
Thank you for that. Can you tell us a little bit about A is for?
Yes. A is for, I'm wearing the ribbon right here. I don't know if you can see me. Can you guys see me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Or are you
Yeah,
seeing me?
we can.
Oh, good. Okay. This is our scarlet letter A. A is for was begun after the debacle with Sandra Fluck and her thwarted testimony before the congressional committee that was talking about, birth control, the birth control mandate in the Affordable Care Act. And we were a bunch of friends of mine and I were so angry. I mean, so many people were so angry, and we were just tired of this just egregious attack on this woman, and saw sort of in very clear relief the kind of misogyny and real just aggressive hatred towards women who choose to make their own decisions about their health and bodies and sexual lives. And so we felt that this woman, Sandra Fluck, had been branded in a way, sort of like with a scarlet letter, that she was being shamed and slut shamed and all kinds of, I mean, she was just being attacked mercilessly all over the place. And we decided that we wanted to do something about the stigma surrounding abortion and reproductive health care. And so we started A is for as a way to sort of raise awareness about this stigma and the effects that it has, the way that it's instrumental in aiding this sort of prohibitive legislation that makes abortion more and more scarce across the country. And that was the idea behind it. The idea behind it was that we would wear that scarlet letter with a measure of pride, without shame, and that we would reclaim it and take ownership over it and not allow people to use it to silence us. So that's really the genesis of A is for. And over the years, we've done a lot of work with different organizations and helped raise money for abortion funds and for the Center for Reproductive Rights and things like this. We've done campaigns sort of similar to this, and house parties where we talk to people about what's going on legislatively throughout the country, and just raising awareness and encouraging people to be open and not afraid to speak. So there you
At
go.
a congressional hearing on abortion rights, I certainly appreciate all the work that you've been doing, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and thanks for this incredible day. I'm so proud to be part of it, and on.
And now I think we're going to be joined by an anonymous caller. Dun, dun, dun.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
You're on.
I am?
You
Yes,
are.
welcome to the
Welcome
Speakout.
to the 1 in 3 Abortion Speakout.
Well, thank you. My name is Michelle, and I had my first abortion when I was 18 years old. I was in no way prepared to be pregnant, let alone prepared to be a parent or carry a child for somebody else. It was an easy decision. It was a decision that was arrived at within 5 minutes of finding out that I was pregnant. And I went to Planned Parenthood, and the procedure was easy and painless, and I never felt like a monster, and I never once regretted it. The second abortion that I had a toddler son at the time. And I knew at the time that there was no way I would be able to provide for 2 children and still try to be able to achieve the life I was trying to achieve at the time. Again, it was a very easy decision. It was a very easy procedure. And I have never up like a monster because of it, and I've never regretted it.
Much for sharing your story. If you could say one thing to the Supreme Court justices, we're wondering what that would be.
I would say, is your medical license up to date? Because really, if you're not doctors, why are you making these decisions? You should all recuse yourself.
We really appreciate that commentary, and we hope that they'll hear it. And now we'll be
I
joined.
hope so too.
Thank you so much. And now we'll be joined by Amelia Bono, founder of the Shout Your Abortion tag on Twitter, who will share the buzz we've been getting today on social media.
Thank you so much. Happy to be back. There's a lot, oops, that's not what I wanted to happen. There's a lot going on today, a lot of people participating. One thing that I just saw was this tweet from Joy Mosenfelder. I was preparing for college. I was not prepared to become a single mother at 18. Luckily, I didn't have to. Hashtag because I had a choice, 1 in 3 speaks. And this is interesting to me because it made me think actually of the amicus brief. We know that women can be able to become more productive members of society in certain ways if they can design their own lives with intentionality, if they can choose if and when to have children. So many times over the last 4 months since Shout Your Abortion took off, I have heard stories from women who just have simply said, I would have never completed my degree, I would have never become a doctor, a lawyer, So, this is about women being productive members of society in a number of ways, in the economic, world as well. So, what would have happened if, what would Joy's life have been if she could not make that choice? Mm-hmm. I'm really glad that we don't know the answer to that question. And then, then we have a story like this, which my abortion story is that I got pregnant at 26 and I didn't want to be, so I had an abortion. And again, I appreciate that coming from nanarchist because that's really all that needs to be said. You know what I mean? You do not have to say, I got an advanced degree, let me explain why let me justify my abortion with going to college. This woman didn't want to be pregnant, and so she had an abortion.
Yeah.
That's that, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
We really, really appreciate getting a sense of what's going on outside of the studio today as well. It's pretty exciting.
Yes, and so please continue to join the conversation out there. Tell us your story or tell us what you'd like to say to the Supreme Court as they make their decision in this case, which we know is going to set a precedent for many, many years to come. Throughout the day, we'll be sharing these stories and comments from hashtag 1 in 3 speaks. You can also share your story via text by texting SHARE to 877-877.
Thanks so much for that great update, Amelia. And now I'd like to welcome Rachel, who's on the phone with us, who will share her story. Welcome, Rachel. Please feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome to the Speak Out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's no problem.
So we're interested in hearing your story.
Okay. Well, my first abortion was in 2004, and it was quite different than the one in 2007. The one in 2004, my doctor just suggested I go to his surgical center in Maryland, and there was no wait time. There was no lectures, absolutely 100% covered by insurance. I was made sure I had birth control after. I mean, it couldn't have been simpler, but it all changed when we moved to West Virginia, and in 2007, it was terrible. With a change of address, everything changed. Just no insurance. We called the insurance. They just said we were on our own. We had to put it all on our credit card, the gas, the price of the procedure, the hotel, everything. It all went on our credit card. It was a rather expensive procedure. There were protesters outside. It was quite frightening for my husband and myself. And we went to Maryland rather than stay in West Virginia to avoid bias counseling and wait times because I was getting far along, and I just wanted it to be over with. So I think the one thing you could take away from my story is that 3 years in from my first abortion, everything started to go downhill with the abortion fight, and women are getting even worse treatment nowadays at the hands of anti-choicers. And I think it's very important we tell our stories to try to make people see that the more you put on women, they're going to, it's not going to help. It's going to make it more traumatic. It's going to make it more hard on them, but they will always find a way. And that's what scares me, is that what's going to happen in the future if we don't listen to each other and say enough is enough.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Your
No problem.
Your story was actually included in the amicus brief filed by Advocates for Youth with the Supreme Court. And so I'm wondering, what did it mean to you to be able to share your story with the court?
It meant a lot. It makes me feel like maybe this pain that I went through will be worth something and maybe change the world, and for the better.
Thank you so much for helping us to shatter the silence today by sharing your story. And now, finally, I'd like to welcome my co-host, Kelly Robinson, Deputy Director of the National Organizing Wing of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi.
Well, we're so happy you're here, and we said goodbye to Miriam a little while ago, but we've really had some great hosts on today. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your work, how you got involved in the movement for reproductive freedom, and what you're doing at Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Kelly Robinson. I'm with Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And I have to say, first of all, it is just a huge honor and a privilege to be sharing this space and hearing inspiring stories like the one that we just heard about the importance of access. And my role at Planned Parenthood is really about ensuring that as we fight for victories that win battles at the state and federal level to ensure that our health centers can stay open, that we're also building a movement for the long term that's led by young people, by people of color, by folks that are directly impacted by the work that we do, and that's important. For me, when I found this work of reproductive freedom, it saved my life in so many ways. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I'm a young woman of color, and seeing a movement that truly understood that the only way for me to get to sexual and reproductive freedom needed to be for me to also fight for racial justice. Mm-hmm. It needed to be for me to also fight for economic justice and for LGBTQ liberation. It needed to be those things. So being able to be in a space that's possible, a place where we can really envision a world that's different from the one we live in is so important. And I'm so happy to be in this movement and fighting for more spaces like this.
Yeah, I have to say I was at the Planned Parenthood Generation Action Conference this summer, and so seeing a lot of women of color like you leading a lot of these really important initiatives as a young activist and a young woman of color means a lot to me.
You better stop.
Another question I have is, we all know that 2015 was a very challenging year for Planned Parenthood, and I'm wondering a little bit about how people on the ground are responding to this in the face of all of the attacks that we've seen on different levels for Planned Parenthood.
Yes, it has been a year, let me tell you. Just one example is that Congress has tried to defund Planned Parenthood 20 times.
That's
20
ridiculous.
votes this year.
Oh,
yes,
my goodness.
That's the kind of world that we're living in. And on top of all of that, we've had sham investigations at the state level. We've had attacks on our clinics, our actual ability to provide care. Mm-hmm. It has been a challenging year that really shows how extreme this fight is that we're in right now and how necessary and critical the work is that we do. But I will say through it, there has been an incredible spirit of resilience that we've seen across the country. During one of the defunding fights, it hit me at my core. There was an event in Salt Lake City, Utah. Salt Lake City, Utah. I don't know if you've ever been to Salt Lake City, Utah, but it's not too huge of a town. But we were in Salt Lake City, Utah, and our local folks wanted to do an event to turn out some people to show support from the community. Mm-hmm. They held an event that turned out 3,000 folks. 3,000 folks in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh my goodness.
It was at that moment where it became so clear to me that our people, they're not tired, they are hungry. They're hungry to do more, and that spirit of resilience is going to ensure that we don't only maintain access to sexual and reproductive health care and our rights, but instead expand them in this year and beyond. And that is something I'm proud of and so happy to be in community with activists and freedom fighters like yourself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Will you introduce our next guest?
I'd love to. Now we are joined via Skype by Sonia Renee Taylor, an activist, a poet, a spoken word performer, and the founder of The Body Is Not an Apology. Sonia Renee will perform a new piece of work she has written specifically for today's Speak Out. Welcome, Sonia Renee.
Hi, how are you?
We're good. We're so excited to hear what you have for us.
Oh my goodness, I'm excited to share it and I'm super nervous. Awesome. Thank you. I just want to thank you all so much for the opportunity to create art that speaks to this important issue. I feel really blessed to have the chance. This new piece is called A Map of the World, the stories of 1 and 3 women. There is a West Virginia road snaking its way around Rachel's arm. It is an alarm, the pressure of tectonic plates, a blood rising, threatening to boil over, spill this cluster of split cells, expire her as well. The doctors here will soon tell her they do not do abortions. What they mean to say is we do not save your kind. Woman too familiar with the plains of your own pleasure. Woman roaming the savannah of your own freedom. We would sooner see you perish than watch you stake claim over the steeps of your own skin. An OBGYN $1,000 later and 400 miles away finally tells Rachel it's okay to claim her body as its own ascendant ground. It's been 2 weeks and no call, no note, no remote inkling of where her husband has gone, but there is a 6-month mouth to feed and a growing seed in Deborah's belly, a foreign land she has been tossed across the border of, a place she has no desire to name, but knows not naming it will not make it cease to exist, so she names it this, not right now. Names it I'm not willing to do this alone, names it choice. And in the small, fertile acreage of her own voice, she is found. It is around week 24. Lisa doesn't go to work anymore since her gut became a violent hurricane that snatched away sick days, leaving behind a pink slip and 2 pink lines. How will she mine this empty lot of unemployment for enough gold to buy back her sovereignty? There is no more lethal shrapnel than the ravening dirt we ask humans to bury our own dreams, where Lisa becomes a ghost town of abandoned wishes, evicted from her own flesh. Imagine the terror of being told you are less than 1 closed pawn shop away from what each screaming cell is yelling would most certainly be life-changing, imminent demise. We call lies on the legislative land barons who tell us they are protecting women, but claim eminent domain over our very breath, as if we have not seen their thievery, watched it build corporate stadiums on the backs of Black grandmothers, run interstates through our uncle's chest. There will be no rest until we pronounce transvaginal ultrasounds the exact same way we pronounce rape. We will not wait for their compass winds to retitle us again, wrap us in the same blankets of care that erased 20 million indigenous people from the compass rose. There are those who will forget that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. One so arrogant as to claim proprietorship over the map of my body will someday claim the map of yours. There are no shores safe from this colonization of limb, whether we be queer, disabled, immigrant, brown, Black, cis women, trans men. There are marauders who want us 72-hour waits away from dominion, want us 1 dying transmission and 500 miles to traverse so we never find our way back to our own treasure. Bandits who will measure our estates by the size of the statutory shackles they can fit us in. But then there is Hannah, gazing at the azimuth of a clinic ceiling. Above her is a planet of stars and a map of the world, what was almost a vanishing geography, the cartography of places she might surely be robbed of knowing, if not for the legality of this moment, amid a machine hum, the green of a kind doctor's mask, when Hannah's lover grasps her hand and whispers, I love you. in a decibel so soft it surely silences the mob outside, court outside, lawyers outside this legend they are creating, where the meridian of their lives is pressed between palms, how they've etched an atlas of unconstrained some days, built of all the lands they've chosen for themselves, like their living room couch, where they'll binge watch Netflix and hold each other whole, space to wield nothing but their own smiles and weeping and whatever may come between. And should we all not have land like this to govern, to reign supreme over whatever roads we may find ourselves on, our own self-defined true north to roam? A world where our pathways are obstruction-free from here to infinity, and every tool is at our reach so that we may, with love and safety, find our own way home.
Wow, wow, wow. Sonia Renee, that was amazing. Your ability to just reflect our collective truth back to us is incredible. So, you have been sharing your story as part of your activism in art for a very long time. Can you tell us what it means to you to be able to address the Supreme Court directly?
I think that it is so essential that we have this space to own our stories and to own them in the highest, most powerful places of power in our society. I think that it is essential to our autonomy and to our ability to truly be given the sovereignty of our own bodies, to be able to say that in front of the Supreme Court, to be able to say that in front of people who are supposed to clarify the legislative process so that we continually separate our laws from individual autonomies and freedom. And I think that it's essential that we are allowed the space to be in front of a Supreme Court speaking truth to power on a regular basis.
Thanks again, Sonia Renee. That was really amazing. We're so happy that you could share that with us today.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Thanks. I'd now like to welcome Sarah, who will also join us by Skype. Sarah, please feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So I've had 2 abortions. One when I was a wild and crazy 20-something, and one when I was a mature and responsible middle-aged mom. In 1992, when Operation Rescue was shutting down clinics in New York City during the Democratic National Convention, I was a teenager and I came down from the suburbs to participate in clinic defense and direct action. I helped distract crowds of people who were shaming and harassing people entering the clinics, people who were calling them murderers and trying to physically prevent them from entering. And when I was in my early 20s, I returned to one of those clinics to access abortion services myself. I had a sweet boyfriend that I was really fond of, but both of us knew that we were in no way ready to be parents, and certainly not with each other. My abortion was easy, it was quick, it was early, painful, yes, expensive, yes, but no regrets. I was really confident in my decision and in exercising my right to what I had fought for, abortion on demand and without apology. Well, then fast forward about 15 years. I'm happily married, professional woman, on the other side of the country, a job I love, great health insurance, my own little house in the country, and after a lot of struggles and a rough pregnancy, a beautiful 1-year-old baby boy. And before my cycles even get regular again, I get pregnant. And this time it's totally different. It would have been possible for me to continue that pregnancy and to have another child. Plenty of people I had been pregnant with were doing it. But I searched my soul, I searched my heart. I talked to my husband, I talked to my therapist. I just did not want to open the door to another child. I'd only planned one child, I only wanted one child. I was 38 years old, and I was happy with my family the way it was. So I talked to my herbalist. I'm like, okay, so I'm pregnant, and there was nothing that she could give me that wouldn't affect my child. I was still breastfeeding. So they said, best thing to do is, go to your doctor. So I call my doctor, right? the medical practice where I had my baby, where I have all my prenatal care, where I had my infertility care, where I had my miscarriage care. And I said, hi, I'm pregnant. I want to make an appointment. And they said, how far are you? I said, 7 weeks. And they said, okay, well, we can schedule your first prenatal appointment at around 11 or 12 weeks. I said, but I don't want to be pregnant. And she said, oh, well, we don't do terminations. And I'm kind of like, what? Like, isn't abortion part of comprehensive reproductive health care? And so we're talking a little bit, and then this recorded voice comes on the line saying, this conversation is now being recorded. And I'm like, what is that? And the person I'm speaking with says, I don't know. And I said, I don't feel comfortable talking anymore. And she said, okay, that makes sense. I'll call you back. And then she did not call me back. So I talked to my husband some more, talked to my therapist some more, and the next day I just called Planned Parenthood. So it turns out there's a Planned Parenthood in the next town, but they only do chemical abortions. So that's where you take a pill in their office and then you go home and you take another pill and you wait to miscarry. Well, first of all, I again at home in my own bathroom. But secondly, breastfeeding. So no one could tell me that that was safe. So there's only one place in the state, one Planned Parenthood office, one place in the state where you can get a surgical abortion. You got to go on a Wednesday. There's not an appointment for 2.5 weeks. So that's what I do. I make the appointment. I take a sick day. My husband takes a sick day. I drive up there. It's an hour away. I'm there all day. And not to mention the hour and a half pre-screening conversation that I have to have standing outside my office. And I have an abortion, I get an IUD put in. Everyone is very nice. My insurance pays for all of it. But I am so angry because I don't know. I mean, I guess I was living under a rock, but I thought that abortion was legal. And I thought that meant that it was part of healthcare and that you could. It took me so much to do that, a procedure that could have been done in 10 minutes at my local doctor's office, a procedure that they certainly could do, a procedure that, in fact, they had done for me when I had miscarried. I was swimming in privilege, right? So I have the job, I have the car, I have the sick day, I have the support, I have the understanding that this is something that I can do and I should do. I have the clarity of mind. But someone who didn't, I needed all of that in order to be able to get the medical care that I needed. And I realized that I had to get back into activism about this because someone who didn't have that kind of privilege was not going to be able to access the services that they need. And so that's why I'm here to tell you my story. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think it really highlights a lot of the things that we want to highlight today in the diversity of stories that we've heard. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Kelly, we're a little curious. What's next?
Right now, I'm happy to share a pre-recorded message from Gretchen Borchelt, the Vice President for Health and Reproductive Rights at the National Women's Law Center.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Borchelt. I'm Vice President for Reproductive Rights and Health at the National Women's Law Center. I am not one of the 1 in 3 women who have had an abortion in her lifetime, but I know so many who have. Some of those have courageously spoken out, including in this Speak Out that this video will be a part of, but others haven't. What they all have in common is that they were able to access and exercise their right to abortion when they needed it. That allowed them to protect their health, to advance in their careers, to finish their education, to be economically secure, to be financially secure, to be physically secure, to be emotionally secure. That's why I know that I can say on behalf of all of these women how critical abortion is for them. That's why I do the work that I do to protect abortion. Abortion is critical for women's lives, it's critical for women's health, it's critical for women's futures. That's why it's so important for the Supreme Court to protect access to abortion, because every woman needs to be able to access abortion when she needs it, no matter why she needs it.
And we thank Gretchen for that message. We also thank her for the work she's doing at NWLC. And now we welcome Melly, who is joining us by Skype to share her story. Please start whenever you're ready, Melly.
6, 103.
You're on. Hi, Melly.
Hi. Sorry.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Absolutely. And feel free to share your story whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. My name is Melly. I had my abortion back in 2011. I just turned 21 years old and had gotten back from San Diego Comic-Con, actually. When I was on the trip, I was able to kind of get up my courage to finally break things off with my boyfriend at the time, who had disrespected my sexual boundaries. I said no, he said yes, sort of a thing. And we started the breakup talk, and he got really upset. And the fight lasted for hours. And finally, I was just too exhausted after the flight to deal with it anymore. So I did the How I Met Your Mother timeout. We'll talk about it in the morning sort of a thing, thinking that everything would be okay. And I woke up during the night to him performing sexual acts on me without protection. I was so terrified and shocked when I'd woken up that I just passed out again. And then when I finally woke up the next morning, I said that was it. I was leaving. I packed up everything and went back to my mother's, and within a couple of days was horrendously ill. The new semester for school had just started, and I could barely make the train ride to school without having to jump off on several stops and throw up. I can make it through a shift of work without feeling lightheaded and woozy, and I almost passed out a couple times on the job. And my period has always been a little irregular, and with the pill, it was spotting at best. And so I didn't think anything was out of the ordinary with the pill, but still decided to just test just to ease my mind. And that came back with the, you're pregnant smiley face, which I thought was a little cruel. So I, without hesitation, knew that I had to get the abortion. I couldn't cope with trying to deal with my education as well as work, while trying to recover from a sexual trauma. And so I talked with family, and I grew up in a pretty strict Catholic household. But once I told my mother what had happened, she then sat me down and said, I've had an abortion too. You have my support 100%. And so, so she went with me when I went to the clinic and walked with me through all the protesters shouting horrible things at me and her. It was completely abysmal. And I was greeted with warmth in the clinic, and we sat in the different rooms to get the consultations, and they ran through all of the options. They talked about the potential for abortion and then the potential for adoption, and just kind of making sure that everything was good and clear, and then what to expect in the abortion procedure. And I opted to go with the misoprostol. I think that's how you pronounce that. And so I then went home and then took the pill the next day. And about 1.5 Star Trek: The Next Generation episodes later, the cramping and the bleeding started, and it was a pretty terrible pain. I don't have that great of a pain tolerance anyway, but it was pretty awful for a couple hours. And then all at once there was a sort of calm that came over me, and I managed to fall asleep. and slept for several hours. And when I woke up, I was able to eat a full meal. I then went to school the next day and resumed work at my job, and had the follow-up appointment a couple weeks later, where then I was told that, that the abortion was successful. And I felt very at peace with it. And I haven't once looked back, but I do still carry my ultrasound photo with me in my wallet. So it's a decision that I absolutely do not regret. I'm thankful for it every day. I've since gone on to act in several productions, both on stage and on film. I've done voiceover work and have also gotten my degree, and I graduated with honors, which would not have been possible without safe access to abortion.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and with the Supreme Court. We're wondering if you could address the court as they decide on this case, what would you say?
I would say that it's a no-brainer decision. Abortion, bottom line, is legal, and it has been legal for several years now. And we've already seen the horrific effects that that restrictions on abortion have had on dozens of women trying to perform unsafe back alley abortions, trying to create an abortion themselves. It's putting these women in danger to not have safe access to a procedure that is legal. And that is crazy to me, that people would go so far as to put their citizens in danger, when really our stories matter. And at the same time, it comes down to, this is something that we need, and we shouldn't be judged for it, and it shouldn't be so stigmatized, or we shouldn't be afraid to go out and receive this medical procedure. It's legal, and it should be safe and widely available, as is our right.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Melly.
Now we say goodbye to my wonderful co-host, Brianna. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. It's really been an honor to be here.
Great. Next up, we have a pre-recorded message from Elise Hogue, the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America. NARAL has been advocating for abortion rights and access for over 45 years. Here's a word from their fearless leader.
I'm Elise Hogue. I'm the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, which I might not be if I hadn't had access to a legal abortion 20 years ago when I got pregnant due to a contraception failure. But let me back up. I always say my abortion story is boring. I got pregnant. I wasn't ready to be a parent. I wasn't with the person I wanted to be with for the rest of my life. We weren't financially secure. We both had dreams that we wanted to go on and achieve. My abortion story was boring because I was able to get my pregnancy test back, choose what I wanted to do, go to a clinic, get the medical care that I needed, and go on with my life. My abortion story was boring because millions of people fought long and hard for me to be able to access safe, compassionate, high-quality medical care in my own community. The abortion that I had was a chapter in my life, but it certainly wasn't the whole story. I think about my abortion, but I certainly don't regret it. It allowed me to go on and do work that I think was incredibly impactful on international rights and environment before I came home to dedicate my life to women's equality. If we can't decide that we're not ready to be parents, then everything else we aspire to fades from view. Even 20 years later, it is much more difficult for women to have access to the services that I had. It is much more difficult with waiting periods, mandatory ultrasounds, and clinics closing all over the country. Everywhere abortion is illegal or inaccessible, the number of abortions don't go down, but the numbers of injuries and deaths to women simply wanting to live their lives and their dreams on their own terms go up. I'm asking the court to allow abortion not just to remain legal, but to be accessible in our own communities, so everyone's abortion story can be as boring as mine. I'm asking the court to uphold the values that are supremely American values, that women can be equal, that we can have dignity in our life decisions, and certainly that we can have the privacy to make the decisions that are best for us and our families moving forward into the future.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the 1 in 3 Speakout. Now, in a few short months, the Supreme Court will decide the most important abortion rights case in 2 decades. They will rule on whether the insidious law that closed most abortion clinics in Texas violates the right to abortion. 45 reproductive health organizations filed briefs urging the Supreme Court to once again uphold a woman's constitutional right to access safe and legal abortion services. Advocates for Youth was proud to be among them, submitting a unique brief compiled entirely of women's real abortion stories from the 1 in 3 campaign. And now, we're continuing our People's Brief. We are addressing the Supreme Court directly and demanding that they listen to our stories. As many of you know, here in the United States, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in her lifetime. And despite the fact that abortion is a very common procedure, we rarely talk openly about our decisions around this issue. For too long, conversations about abortion have been dominated by politicians and anti-choice activists who use shame and stigma as a tool to silence people and to advance legislation that limits access to abortion services. But not today. Today, we are asking the court to listen to a different conversation, one that is grounded in the lived experiences of our real people, one that works towards building community rather than isolation, compassion rather than shame. A conversation that recognizes that access to abortion and the ability to plan if and when you carry a pregnancy to term is crucial to the ability to protect not only your own future, but your family's too. And which honors everyone's right to dignity and autonomy. I am privileged to be one of the hosts for this historic event. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to the many people who will be joining us later with their personal stories. We have had a time so far. In the previous hour of the Speak Out, we heard from Sonia Renee Taylor, a spoken word poet who has written about her own abortion. We heard from Rachel, who faced not only cumbersome restrictions, but stigma from her own family. And we heard powerful words from Elise Hogue, the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America. All of us have a role in shattering the stigma and ensuring that we all have access to safe and legal abortion care. If you're at home, you can join the conversation today. Tell your story or tell us what you'd like to say to the Supreme Court as they make their decision in this historic case. Throughout the day, we'll be sharing stories and comments from hashtag 1in3speaks. Or you can share your story via text by texting SHARE to 877-877. Together, we can make sure that the Supreme Court knows that real people are at the center of decisions about access to abortion care. If you're watching today and would like to support the work of the 1 in 3 campaign, please visit www.1in3campaign.org/donate. I'm joined in this hour by my co-host Connie, a 1 in 3 activist at the University of Missouri. Welcome, Connie.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Connie, will you do us a solid and introduce our next guest?
We are joined now in the studio by Michelle Kinsey Bruns, a fierce activist who works online as well as on the ground to ensure access to abortion. Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Connie. It's an honor to be here.
Right now, we're going to show a video we have of you sharing your story at the Supreme Court.
My name is Michelle Kinsey Bruns, and I'm one of the 1 in 3 American women who will have an abortion in her lifetime. The abortion that I had was over 20 years ago. I had just turned 18, and I was in no way ready to give birth or to parent. I had spent my teen years floating around living with different family members after living with my mother and my stepfather, which was an abusive household. I had left when I was 15 and wasn't right in the head, and certainly didn't have the emotional resources or the financial resources. Trying to be a teenager living on my own, I couldn't have had a child. But it may be even more important to me that I didn't want to have a child. What I wanted was the opportunity to get my life together, to finish my education, to develop a career, to build the healthy life that I had never actually had yet when I turned 18. And so when I found out that I was pregnant, right around the time that I turned 18, I was very lucky to be living in a city where abortion care was available, was accessible. There were multiple quality providers. I had an appointment with a wonderful doctor who held my hand and asked me if I was sure because he saw me crying. And I said, no, I'm so sure. I'm just scared of doctors. And so I had the procedure, and the scariest part was getting a shot. The scariest part was anesthesia. So I've never once regretted it. It's been over 20 years, and the provider who gave me the abortion, that gave me the chance to have the life that I deserved to have, has retired now, and I worry about people in that southern city who might need for him or his replacements to be there. I think every person, whether or not they had a rough family situation like mine, should have that same opportunity to build their life, to make the decision to parent or not to parent, when and how they're ready. And so that's the reason that I'm out here explaining that that this is a right that everybody should have. And I will say again that 20 years later, I am not sorry. I'm grateful every single day. I would like to urge the Supreme Court to make sure that everybody has the same access to accessible, quality abortion care that I had. Bodily autonomy is a human right. It is important for every single person to have that access.
That was a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being a part of this historic event. I wanted to talk with you about a Twitter movement you led recently. You recounted the incidents of violence against abortion providers over the last 4 decades. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Sure. On November 27th, I was online when I saw news of an active shooter situation at a Planned Parenthood in Colorado Springs. And so I made the obvious assumption that one would make when you know the history of anti-abortion violence in this country. And so I tweeted, how many more clinic shooters, bombers, and acid attackers until we can call this by its rightful name? These aren't lone wolves, this is terrorism. And you know, the fact that my assumption was absolutely correct didn't stop Twitter conservatives from just losing it. Instantly, they began tweeting at me that, you know, how dare I say that this was about abortion? The shooter just happened to be at Planned Parenthood. How dare I politicize? And how dare, in fact, I even say that there's such a thing as an anti-abortion clinic violence problem in this country. One person tweeted that I was a zealot with zero concern for the truth, actively perpetuating a falsehood. Another said that the only deaths that have occurred at this and every Planned Parenthood facility today are aborted fetuses. And you know, this was amazing to me, and it kind of made me sick because people have died for providing reproductive health care. People have been maimed, shot and stabbed and bombed. Real, living, breathing people who have families who love them and patients who depend on them. And to have these Twitter trolls just erasing them, it was disgusting and it was wrong. So I logged off of Twitter and spent the next day and a half compiling citations about the very real 4-decade history of anti-abortion violence in this country, beginning with the first known clinic arson, which happened in 1976, and continuing on through the present day. 2 days after the shooting, I had finished compiling and I tweeted all of these. I tweeted 100 examples of these clinic violence incidents, and each one had a place, a date, and a link to a news story or a book excerpt. And I gave each one the hashtag, is 100 enough? And the question I asked was, if 100 examples won't convince you that clinic violence is real, how many will it take? And it took me nearly 2 hours to tweet out all of these examples, but there was so much that I left out.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned some of the trolls that you had to deal with, but what other reactions did you see from folks online?
Well, a number of the trolls who I'd had on the Friday were conspicuously silent by Sunday when I began tweeting. I guess it's hard to argue with the volume of documentation and receipts that I was putting out there. But among other people, the hashtag really took off. People retweeted these incidents thousands of times, and I also put together a Storify page so that every tweet could be compiled on one page, easy to read. That page gained 150,000 views in just a couple of days, which was fantastic. I think some of the most gratifying reactions of people reacting directly to me were to say, wow, I didn't know about these. I didn't know about this history. And that is so gratifying because that's the point, right? People don't know when they should. The fact that in recent years, anti-abortion violence has not been quite as lethal as it was in, say, 93 and 94 when 4 separate pro-life shooters killed 5 people and wounded another 7. People don't pay as much attention to the problem because it's not that bad anymore, but the problem very much remains. And so my hope is that through efforts like mine, through the amplification of others who shared my work, and other activists and writers who are paying attention to this history, my hope is that people can begin to connect the dots between these acts of anti-abortion violence on one hand, and on the other hand, this kind of very extreme rhetoric and other tactics used by anti-abortion advocates. The violence that we see doesn't happen in a void. You don't get to a place where people are being mowed down by bullets in a doctor's office without first having had a concerted effort of cultural narrative to portray abortion care providers as monsters and to portray abortion itself as some unspeakable act rather than a fact of life for 1 in 3 women.
And what does it mean to you today to be able to share your story with the Supreme Court?
I just hope they're listening, not just to me, but to everybody speaking, with the full recognition that those of us who are here today, those of us sharing our stories, we represent millions of people who made the decision to have an abortion because it was the right thing for us at the time. Speaking of anti-choice cultural narratives, one that they like to push is that women will and do regret their abortions by the millions. In fact, we know when we look at peer-reviewed studies that that's very much a minority experience. Nonetheless, anti-choicers have had some success with that argument before the Supreme Court. Justice Kennedy relied on it, in his opinion, for Gonzalez versus Carhart. So to Justice Kennedy, to the entire court, I would say that even if a person regrets a major life decision, then it's still hers to make for herself. There's absolutely nobody else who's qualified to do it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Right now, I'm delighted to share a pre-recorded message from Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. I represent the people of the District of Columbia. Thank you to the 1 in 3 campaign for helping to end the stigma on abortion by sharing women's abortion stories from across the country. DC's low-income women have a unique abortion story of their own to tell our country. We do not fear that abortion will stigmatize us. The stigma they feel comes from Congress, which blocks DC from spending its own local funds for abortion for the women who need the most. We in the District of Columbia join the 1 in 3 campaign today to show our support for women who've had an abortion and to thank the brave women who have shared their stories. Together, we say to the Supreme Court, let women choose. Thank you.
Yes, let women choose. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Julie Bindeman to join us by Skype.
Hi, it's good to be here. My story starts 13 years ago on my wedding day when one of the thoughts I had was, well, now that I'm getting married, I won't have to have an abortion. I'll be married, we'll figure it out. If we have an unintended pregnancy, we had some resources, and we definitely had decided we wanted children. So went through, decided when it was right that we were going to start our family. I had a very uncomplicated pregnancy that resulted in the birth of a healthy little boy in 2007. And when he was about a year and a half old, my husband and I decided that we wanted to expand our family. So I was able to get pregnant fairly quickly, which surprised both of us. I thought that since the first time it happened quickly, that the second time I was sure to take, a good 6 months or so before being pregnant. And so I remember sitting here going, okay, well, that happened a little bit fast, but this is what we wanted, and I'll figure it out, and I've got some time to figure it out. And when I thought I was 8 weeks along, I had gone in for an ultrasound and learned that I had miscarried. So we were told that we should let a cycle go by and then try again, which is exactly what we did. And I thought with that next cycle that I had gotten a period. I thought that finally my husband was going to get the chance to have the fun in trying for a family, and not just have it happen on that first try. So, um, just sort of was like, oh, okay, well, we'll test again next month. And I was about what I thought was a cycle when I started bleeding. So I called my doctor, who recommended I take a pregnancy test. And at that point in time, I was like, oh, no way, I'm not pregnant. Um, and so I was really surprised when the result came back positive, and overjoyed, but then freaking out because I was bleeding. And my only experience was, wow, bleeding equals miscarriage. So I was able to go to the doctor, have some blood drawn, have a sonogram, and I was told that I had a hematoma, which is very common, that was not impacting the pregnancy, and that the pregnancy seemed fine. So we got out of the first trimester, and I was really terrified I was going to miscarry, but everything seemed fine. Went through the screenings, thought everything was fine. Everything came back for chromosomal abnormalities, as we were not a very high risk for it. So we were just sailing through the pregnancy. I started telling my clients and formulating a plan for a maternity leave. And my husband and I were able to book a 20-week ultrasound that worked with his work schedule. So it was the Friday before Thanksgiving in 2009. And we went to our doctor's office and then told, because I had had so many ultrasounds earlier, that insurance wouldn't pay for an ultrasound there. They sent me to a radiologist's office, and that's where I had my 20-week anatomy scan. And my husband and I just expected to learn whether or not we were having a boy or a girl at that visit. So we went. The tech was really chatty, and she told us we're having another boy. I remember being a little sad that I was going to have another boy instead of the girl that I wanted. But my husband and I were good natured about it. We joked, okay, well, I guess we'll have to have three so we can try for that girl. And the tech told us just to go back to our doctor's office. I even asked if the radiologist wanted to check in with us, and she pointedly said, oh, no, just go back to your doctor's. And we thought everything was fine. We thought this was just what you did if you went outside of your doctor's office for a scan. So we were ushered into one of the private offices, and we sat down and we're chatting about names. And my doctor came in, and the first words out of her mouth was, I'm so sorry. And we kind of looked at her going, what are you talking about? And I remember saying to her, oh, so it's another boy. We'll just have to try for a third and have our girl then. And the look I describe her having to me is like I had two heads. And finally, it dawned on her that we had no idea why she was apologizing. And so she said, no one's told you. And we looked at her again and said, told us what? And she said, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but the scan showed that your baby's brain, there's some severe developmental problems with it. So I kind of flip onto psychologist mode, and I start asking about different brain structures and brain development, um, and all sorts of things. And she's like, wow, I can't answer your questions. I don't know the answers. So we went that afternoon to a maternal fetal medicine specialist, and we had a second opinion scan. And that's where we had a lot of questions answered. So basically, at that scan, what we learned was Our son had a condition called ventricular megaly, which is when the brain ventricles are very enlarged, and due to their enlargement, the cerebral spinal fluid is unable to drain into the spine and thus pools in the brain. And the problem with this during gestation is that if there's no room in the brain because it's all being taken up by fluid, there's no room for brain structures to actually grow. So our son had this, and he had another condition, which is the fluid in the brain called hydrocephalus. And we were told at that time that we should go to Children's National Medical Center. We live outside of Washington, D.C., and get a third opinion, and we could learn about prognosis and options. And they had started to talk to us about we could terminate the pregnancy or we could carry to term. My husband and I spent that whole weekend talking, and we decided, based upon what the findings were the next week at Children's, that would influence our decisions. So if the quality of life for our son was going to be very poor, we would choose to terminate the pregnancy. But if there was hope for him and his quality of life would be manageable for all of us, then we would continue on. So we went down to Children's. I was really hopeful that we were going to have the prognosis of this is manageable, there's surgeries, there's, occupational therapy or other kinds of things that we can do. So I had an MRI, and then I had another ultrasound at Children's, and we sat down with all sorts of amazing doctors there, a pediatric neurosurgeon, a radiologist, genetic counselors, and one by one, as they're sharing what their findings were, we're learning that we had a really, really bad case. And I always look at the doctors at Children's as hope givers. Their job is to inspire hope, even in cases that seem really severe. So they started talking to us about, he could die before birth, he could die after birth, it could be days, it could be hours, it could be up to 40 years. And there were different chairs he could have as he grew, but he would never speak, and he would never walk, and he would never crawl. He'd never be able to eat independently. He would basically be reliant on other people to care for him. And we knew that this was not the quality of life that we wanted for our child. It wasn't the quality of life we wanted for our family. It wasn't the quality of life we wanted for our living son. And so my husband and I made the heartbreaking decision to terminate the pregnancy prematurely. And we were really lucky in a weird way, I guess, because we were given a couple of options. We could either travel to New Jersey, which was the only state nearby us that had a provider who was doing surgical abortions. At this point in time, I was 21 weeks gestation. Or I could have my OBGYN do a labor and delivery and terminate the pregnancy that way. And so I was a little confused by it because I knew abortion was legal in my state. I knew the statute was up to 24 weeks. So I wasn't quite understanding why I couldn't have a surgical abortion in my state, but I opted to stay close to home. We were able to schedule for the day after Thanksgiving, and I had a labor and delivery in my local hospital where I was able to be near my son, where I was able to have family be supportive of me. And we met with specialists afterward to try to determine what was going on. We did genetic testing, and the best guess at that point was, this was a 1 in a million fluke. Get pregnant again, it should be fine. So when you're on the 1 in 1 of a million, it's kind of hard to relax into the idea that everything will be fine next time. So once again, I became pregnant easily. And this time we were being monitored every couple of weeks to look at brain development. And we had kind of a false alarm at 15 weeks, and we learned we were having a girl, and I was so excited I was going to have a daughter. And at 17 weeks, the maternal fetal medicine doctor came in with the genetic counselor, and I knew that that was never good. And she said, this baby's, her ventricles are trending kind of towards the top end of normal. It could be nothing. We're cautiously optimistic, but we want you to go back to Children's for an MRI. So I went back to Children's, really hoping that, this was just within the norm, that this wasn't going to be a problem. And the MRI and the subsequent ultrasound found that her brain, similar to her brother's brain, also had ventricular megaly and hydrocephalus. And the other thing that they found was it had partial agenesis of the corpus callosum, which meant that the left and right hemispheres weren't able to talk to each other fully. Some of the pathways were there, but not all of them. And when I asked a good friend of mine and colleague to look at the research just so I could get a sense of outcomes and what prognosis might look like. And she came back to me saying that full agenesis, brain development might be very normal, but partial agenesis, it's never normal. So she also came back telling me that with the levels of ventricular megaly that we had, which was a little bit of north of normal, if there was nothing else going on in the brain, the child had an 85% chance of living a healthy life. But with other brain anomalies, that percentage went down very, very dramatically. I think it was actually 0% because there was no parents in the studies had been willing to see what happened, to wait and see. So they had all chosen to terminate their pregnancies. And so my husband and I faced once again this really devastating decision, and we chose to terminate our pregnancy. And because now I was 18 weeks along, and we were able to make the decision quickly, I was able to have a surgical abortion nearby in the District of Columbia with the most compassionate doctor. Actually, both of the doctors that I had were amazing. And I really credit the fact that because of these really brave individuals, I was able to later have the family that I wanted. I went on to have a healthy daughter and a healthy son. And feel our family is complete, but I don't feel like the state or the federal government has any place in making the decision that my husband and I had to make together, along with our medical professionals that were able to guide us. And so it is my hope that if the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court is going to be hearing this case with Whole Women's Center, that they are able to uphold the rights of women, uphold the ideas that women are capable, intelligent, smart human beings that are able to make their own healthcare decisions. And in fact, there's no other procedure in healthcare that is quite as regulated as abortion, nor can I imagine that there ever would be. So it's really unfortunate that this is the one procedure that is being targeted when it's a procedure that enables women to have autonomy. It enables women to choose when they have a family, what kind of family they have. And the government just has no place in this decision.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Benjamin. We truly appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm really confident that the bravery that you've shown in sharing your story has opened up the space for others to share theirs as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Right now, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Senator Wendy Davis, who's joining us by Skype. Senator Davis made national headlines in 2013 when she filibustered the restrictive Texas abortion law for over 11 hours, also making those pink Mizuno shoes fly off the shelves. That law was passed still, and a version of that restrictive law is actually the very one that the Supreme Court will examine this year. We are pleased to introduce Senator Davis.
Thank you. I'm so happy to join your conversation and to share my story. My name is Wendy Davis. I am a former Texas state senator, and in June of 2013, I stood for actually almost 13 hours in an effort to try to block an anti-abortion bill that was before the state legislature. As part of that day, I read the stories of so many brave women who are willing to come forward and to share their very personal abortion experiences. They did so, of course, in the hope that legislators would listen and that they would vote against a bill that would actually harm, not further, women's health. As I read those stories that day, and particularly when I read the story of Carol M., which was very similar to my own, I knew that I would need to come forward and share mine. I felt an obligation to the other women who had been so brave. And so when I published my memoir in 2014, I did share publicly my experience. And I want to do it again today because I think that talking about our experiences and helping to bring these stories out of the shadows helps to end the stigma and legitimizes why it's so important that we keep this precious constitutional right available to women, regardless of the state that they live in, regardless of the amount of money that they have in their checking account. In 1996, I was pregnant for the 4th time. A couple of years prior, I had lost a pregnancy that was an ectopic pregnancy. I was devastated then, and so I was elated when I found out 2 years later that I was expecting again. Things rocked along fairly normally for many weeks. There was a little blip in the road with one of the blood tests that I had that indicated that there might be something awry, but a sonogram revealed that we were probably going to be okay. Unfortunately, post 20 weeks, and this is of course why the 20-week ban is such a precarious and dangerous thing, we discovered definitively that our baby daughter that we were hoping so very much to bring into the world suffered from a very rare brain abnormality known as Dandy-Walker syndrome. Not only did she suffer from the abnormality, but she had what is a very extreme case on the spectrum of that particular disorder. My then husband, Jeff, and I went to 4 different doctors around the state of Texas seeking some hope that she might have a semblance of I won't even say normal life, but a life that would not be one of suffering. And what we were told by every doctor confirmed our greatest fears. Number 1, that she probably would not survive to term. Number 2, if she did, she probably would not survive delivery. And number 3, in the very rare event that she did survive delivery, she would likely live a life that would not be considered a life that any of us would believe was one that was sustainable. We, of course, agonized over the decision that we would make, and we made the decision that we felt was in the best interest of her. We went to my doctor's office and told him our decision, one that we hoped would spare her the suffering that we knew would come. And we chose on our terms to terminate our pregnancy in a way that we felt was the most loving thing that we could do, honestly, for her. Our doctor injected something into her heart and stilled her heartbeat as we watched her on the screen. As you can imagine, it was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I also would never wish that another woman would lose the opportunity to make a decision guided as I made mine. I prayed quite a bit about the decision that I made. I'm a faithful person. My then husband, Jeff, did the same. And we grieved for a very, very long time after the termination of that pregnancy. But never for a moment have I regretted what I did. And never for a moment have I believed that a politician was in a better place to make a decision like that than I was. That's what I found so offensive about the law that passed in the state of Texas. Legislators played medical doctor. They decided what was in the best interests of women. And in fact, they knew at the time that what they were doing had nothing to do with the best interests of women or women's health, and had everything to do with closing as many abortion clinics in our state as possible. That's what we see happening around this country, a steady creep of laws and regulations that seek to constrain that constitutional right. Where efforts have been unsuccessful to overturn it, they are trying in every way they can to pull back and to constrain it as much as possible. It's my hope that by sharing my story in my book, in the amicus brief that we filed in the Whole Woman's Health case before the Supreme Court right now, and in sharing it with you today, that it will embolden other women to come forward and to tell their stories. I believe very strongly in sharing our human stories and taking these issues out of the abstract, making them real, and helping the human beings who are those 9 justices on the Supreme Court to understand and to see that we are people who deserve these constitutional protections and that we're relying on them to make sure they do the best thing for our interests in privacy, as well as our decisions to make medical decisions on our own and without the intrusion of politicians. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of this today. And thank you for allowing me an opportunity to share my story with you.
Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. What a remarkable story. Connie, who's next?
Next, I'd like to welcome artist and author Saya Miller, who has been working with Advocates for Youth to create a graphic novel of abortion stories. Saya, can you start by telling us your own story?
Yeah, absolutely. I had an abortion at the age of 25 in the spring of 2014, and I'm a resident of New Orleans. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was unable to access an abortion through my health insurance with the regulations in my state at the current time. So I actually traveled to California to obtain an abortion with my insurance that I had at that time. And I was assisted in doing that by my sister, who's a health professional. So I was lucky enough to have the resources and the privilege of being able to travel there to get that abortion at that time. That was also the time that I was just beginning to connect with advocates to start working in some capacity on this project. My own history in comics comes largely from a project that I've been working on since I was 18 with a friend of mine, Liza Bly. We published a book called Not Your Mother's Meatloaf, a sex education comic book, in 2013, which is a collection of sex ed comics that are entirely based on people's personal experiences, a lot of them coming of age stories. So from that background, we decided to start working on this graphic novel project that would bring together people's personal experiences with abortion and put them into graphic novel form. We began to collect submissions from a variety of sources. Some of the artists contributed their stories through the 1 in 3 campaign, and we arranged for their stories to be illustrated by artists who were either their friends or who were total strangers, but who had an interest in helping with the project. We also had people submit their own stories. Many of the people who submitted tell the stories of abortions that they got throughout the decades. So it includes the story of a woman who got an abortion in pre-Roe 1969, and also stories of people who got abortions in the last few months. So the range of the stories and the experiences is really rather large and comes from a huge diversity of different kinds of people and who live in different states.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and with the Supreme Court. Can you maybe tell us a little more about the process of creating the graphic novel with advocates?
Absolutely. I was paired up with Emily Bridges, and we began to advocate for submissions that would focus mostly on just the personal experiences of the people who were submitting comics. We really weren't looking for any sort of particular political message, and we did not instruct the participants on what they needed to include in their comic. We simply asked that people tell their stories, and from there, we collected the comics based on what they wanted to write about themselves. So from that process, we really got a huge myriad of perspectives, and each and every person sort of explained where they were coming from and what point in their life they were at when they made the decision to get their abortion. So we have really a large variety of stories and a huge difference in the way that people were able to access those abortions. The graphic novel is not made up of professional artists alone. These are really regular people who wanted to tell their story and wanted to contribute a comic. So the styles vary a lot, and there are a lot of different ways that people chose to present the story and chose to draw their comics. With the project of Not Your Mother's Meatloaf, we really advocated for sort of a do-it-yourself approach to comic making, and we believe that anyone can make a comic, and I sort of tried to incorporate that sentiment into the editing process for this book. We also really attempted to align the feeling of the book with the sentiment of the 1 in 3 campaign, not demonizing anyone's story, listening to each and every person's perspective and finding the value in giving voice to those experiences. So through the comics, you can really see how that comes through. There are stories that come from teenagers, that come from someone who was a nun in a foreign country. There are people who help people get abortions every day. We had a story from someone who works at a clinic. So we also have perspectives of providers in the book as well. And we really focused on people who have firsthand experience with abortion. So that was our focus for the book.
Saya, thank you so much. I am very excited to check out this graphic novel. I'd now like to welcome Emily by Skype. Emily, please start whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm nervous. So many years now, I'm allowed to talk about this. So I've been pregnant twice in my life. The first time was 10 years ago when I was 35, and I had an abortion. And the second time I was 38 and I had my son. The first time was a huge shock. I had been successfully using birth control for almost 2 decades. And from the minute I found out I was pregnant, I was just 100% sure that it would be wrong to let the pregnancy continue. I was so sick and so scared, and everything in me just said, nope, no. I talked to friends and family, and I made pros and cons lists, but that initial feeling just never changed. I was in a stable relationship with a good guy, but we were really wrong for each other, and ultimately that was proven to be true. And would have been a really sad, broken family into which to bring a kid. And something in my gut knew that. And so I had an abortion. It was a DNC surgical abortion. My boyfriend came with me, and he and the providers were supportive and wonderful. And I went home and ate a huge cheeseburger. And within a day, I was back to my old self and very relieved. If I continued that pregnancy, I'm sure I would have loved the child and made the best of it, but I'd either still be with that man or I'd be struggling to co-parent with him. And either way, I would be horribly resentful and probably not very mentally healthy. And most importantly to me, my son wouldn't be here. And I feel very strongly that my son is meant to be here. When I got pregnant with him, the second time I was pregnant, it was also by accident. And the circumstances, frankly, looked worse on paper. My now husband had just graduated from a really expensive design school, and he didn't have a job. And we had been broken up and weren't back together all that long. And it made no sense to have a baby. But again, I had a strong sense, and it said, yep, here we go. And today I am so grateful and so glad that I made the human that I did with the human that I did. And we eventually got married, and my husband eventually got a job, and we love where we live. And my past weekend, and he's the love of my life, and I love being a mother, and I'm so incredibly grateful I was allowed to take on that role when the time was right, and that I can do the job the way that I want to. And I know a lot of people have made very different choices under the similar circumstances, but it's just so personal. And I have a loving, happy, healthy family and a wanted child. And I had the freedom to choose that. And I also live in a big city that had easy access, and I have health insurance, and I had support. And I've known women who don't have those privileges. And I can't understand why anyone would ever want to make an unintended pregnancy harder on them. So the toothpaste is out of the tube, and we know we don't have to continue unwanted pregnancies. And it seems unimaginably cruel to me to force women to do so. And I'm so glad I had the chance to make my own family and my insurance.
Thank you so much. These really are the stories the Supreme Court needs to hear. Emily, if you could address the court yourself today, what would you say?
I'm 45, and I'm probably never going to need an abortion again, but my son's generation has the chance to raise wanted children, and I want him to grow up trusting that his government cares about women and cares about their health and freedom. And so I would tell them, I will say to them, Supreme Court, please, we are counting on you to protect us and our children, and please do the right thing and rule that Texas law unconstitutional, because it is, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Kelly, who's our next guest?
We are joined now by Ruth via Skype. Ruth, please start whenever you're ready. Can you hear us, Ruth?
I'm sorry.
Hey, Ruth, you're on with 1 in 3 Speaks, our Abortion Speakout. We're ready to hear your story.
I certainly am ready to tell it. Okay. I actually have 2 stories. They're connected to each other. The first happened in the spring of 1968. I got a phone call. I was married. I'd been married for about 3 months. I got a phone call from a colleague of mine at work. He actually wanted to speak to my husband, not to me. And when he got on the phone with my husband, he asked my husband, we told my husband that he had a niece who was a freshman in college, and she needed an abortion. And she asked my husband whether he happened to have a list of physicians who would do an abortion in a hospital. Now, this was the spring of 1968, and this was in New York. An abortion was not legal in New York at the time unless you could demonstrate that the pregnancy was threatening the life of the mother. So it turned out that my husband did have the phone number and address of a physician who would do a hospital abortion. And a couple of days later, there were the 2 of us in the physician's office with the young lady. And he explained to her exactly what was going to be involved. And he then gave her a document to sign. And the document said that she was feeling suicidal and that she might take her life if the pregnancy continued. Well, she said to the doctor, that's not true. And he said, I understand that it's not true, but I can't do this unless you sign the document. She refused to sign the document. And the end result was that she and her aunt flew to Puerto Rico and had the abortion done in the office of a physician that had been recommended to them by somebody else. I was just beside myself about this outcome, partly because the young woman wasn't willing to lie in order to get what she wanted done, but also partly because it was an awful thing, it seemed to me, to require somebody to lie in order to terminate a pregnancy that wasn't wanted. I began to then, at that point, pay attention to abortion politics in my state and discovered that there was a bill before the legislature, and I became an activist in favor of reforming the abortion laws in New York State. The second part of my story happened in the spring of 1971, by which time the abortion laws had been reformed in New York State. At that point, I was a mother. I had a child who was about 18 months old. and I discovered that I was pregnant again. Now, my husband and I had both been thrilled with our first pregnancy. We really wanted to have a family. In fact, we intended to have a large family, and we couldn't have been more excited about the first pregnancy and our first child. However, when I found out that I was pregnant the second time, I was working full time, and my husband had just started a business. And at that point, the business was not bringing in any income. Now, when I was pregnant the first time, I was working full time. But it turned out that my employer had a very progressive, for those days, this is 1971, very progressive maternity policy, namely that I could take off as much as 6 months without loss of my position. All I needed was the approval of my supervisor. Now, I wasn't going to get paid, but I wasn't going to lose my position. And so in my first pregnancy, I did take 6 months off. That is when my first child was born. I took 6 months off, and they were wonderful 6 months. I needed to go back to work. I wanted to go back to work, and I did go back to work when she was about 6 months old. But now she's about 18 months old, and my husband has no income. And I know that I can't take those 6 months off because they were 6 months off without income. We now have a house, we're paying a mortgage. I'm working full time, so we're paying a babysitter. There was just no way that we could manage at that point a second pregnancy and a second child. And so I decided that I wanted to terminate the pregnancy. My husband wasn't as convinced as I was, but that it was a good idea. But he said basically to me, that's your decision. And I said, there's just no way. I can't welcome this child. I can't welcome this pregnancy the way I welcome the pregnancy and our first child. And I just don't want to have a child that I'm not in love with the pregnancy from the moment I know about it. So I had the abortion. The abortion was done in a hospital. It was done by the same physician who had delivered our first child. And I thought to myself, what a blessing that I'm going to be able to plan when I want my children, how I want my children, and it's altogether legal, and I don't have to sign anything, and I don't have to be humiliated, and I'm doing something that I can stand up and be proud of. And that is why I continued my pro-choice activism to this very day, because I don't want my daughters, I now have 3. I don't want my granddaughters, I now have 2. Actually, I don't want any of my children or grandchildren, spouses or my own, male or female, to ever have to have a pregnancy that they don't want at that moment.
Thanks for being with us, Ruth.
Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to take a moment now to dig in and interview my co-host here, Connie. So, Connie, you helped to organize one of the largest in-person abortion speakouts at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Can you tell us a little bit about the event and why you put it on and what that moment was like?
Definitely. So the University of Michigan Abortion Speakout has been happening for 3 years now. Every time we get a crowd of about 200 to 300 people. We have a dozen or so people who share their stories, including this year we had a form for people to submit stories anonymously. And it is just always a very powerful event. And I do want to say the University of Michigan has a reputation for being a progressive campus. So in some ways, we are very lucky to be able to put on